Morning everybody, how are you all doing today? I hope you're well. I haven't quite made it back to the garden yet, but I'm getting my hands dirty today, yay! Just filling these pots with compost to get them ready. So the other day I was mentioning how I'm behind on my sowings in terms of my March sowings of tomatoes and celery. Need to get those done, all sorts to do in the garden. How am I prioritising? Because I can't do everything today. Thing is, in London, as elsewhere in the country as far as I know, we've suddenly gone a bit chilly. We had that one day of gorgeous sunshine last week, and now we're chilly again, with nighttime temperatures going below freezing, daytime temperatures in single figures. So I'm sort of thinking I'm just going to hold off doing any garden sowings for a week or so, a few days at least. And actually that's fine, because getting the tomatoes and celery started are definitely my priority. Now, let's just get this out of the way. I'm just using multi-purpose compost. I don't have a particularly favourite brand, just so long as it's peat free. So, tomatoes and celeries in a moment, but before I do those, actually let me bring you closer, that's better. Before I do the tomatoes and the celery, I need to prick out my peppers. And you see they've shot up. It's partly because as they get more and more of their true leaves, as opposed to the seed leaves, they start to, because they're all quite crowded in here, they're starting to fight for light a little bit, so they're shooting up. Did I say these are peppers? These are my orange bell. Yeah, this is orange bell. So I've got 18 small pots like this. I put 2 seeds per pot. Most of the pots, pretty much everything germinated. They were sown the 19th of February and were generally up by the beginning of March. So it's high time to get these potted on into individual pots. I've probably got about 100 pepper plants. I would love to be able to plant them all. I don't think I'm going to have space though, so I'm going to pot on, I can't decide, I will pot on at least 20 of each of my 3 varieties. And one of the reasons I want to get on with this, apart from the fact that they need it, is then I have these little pots to start my tomatoes in, rather than making tons and tons and tons of these paper pots. Now I have made a load of these the other day. I make these specifically for celery seed starting, if nothing else. And when I come to prick them out, well, when I plant them I'll explain, but when I come to prick them out, I'm so glad of a paper pot that I can just cut down the side. That's for later. For now, excuse me, let's get on with potting these on. So I might need to tip you down. Oh, I think we're going to have lots of little adjustments today. Bear with me. So there are my 2 lovely little plants in there. Very simply, I'm going to place my fingers around them, tip the pot upside down, give it a little bit of a squeeze, bit of a tap, help them to come out. You see a mass of roots there. Just gently pop it on there. Now, very gently tease them apart. So I've got one plant on its own. I simply make a hole with my finger, pop all those roots in. Make sure your roots are all down there and covered. And rather like I do with my tomatoes when I pot them on, I'm just potting it a little bit deeper than it was in its previous pot, and that should actually help it to develop some more roots coming off that stem. but also just anchor it in this pot a bit more sturdily, because they were getting a little bit leggy, a little bit floppy. They're fine, they're not too leggy, not too floppy. What I will also do, I need to get down to the garden to get it, is I've got all my ends of broken bamboo canes, some quite fine ones, and just give it a little stick support in there, so as it's growing I can tie it in just to help it sort of not flop around and be unhappy. So when you're handling your seedlings, says she, doing it really cat-handedly, I like to just gently sort of cup the leaves between my fingers, or if it's got a really solid root ball you can grab it by the root ball. What you don't want to be doing is handling your seedlings by the stem, because the stem is actually really quite a delicate, vulnerable part of the plant at this stage. So yeah, a little bit of care, a little bit of tender handling at this stage, and get them all potted on. Now what I want to do is I'm going to quickly grab that label. So this whole tray will be orange bell, and then possibly a half tray. So I've got 20 here. If I do a half tray I might get another 10. So yeah, hopefully I'll get 30 of my orange bell, 30 preferably of my faff, which is the paprika pepper, and anywhere up to 20 of the du long de londe, which, yeah, I'm not bothered about having quite so many of them. I like to have them, but not so many. So I'd better get on and do this. This is going to take me probably an hour to sort out all the peppers. Then we can reconvene and talk about tomatoes and celery and why I like the paper pots. Well, that's my first lot of peppers done. Yes, it's taken about half an hour. I'm now going to move on to my faff and the du long de londe. I'm not going to show you that. I just wanted to say a couple of things which I forgot to say. I'm going from 6 centimetre pots up to 8 centimetres, bearing in mind there were 2 in there, so it's almost like they were in 3 centimetre pots. So these should be sufficient to bring them on until, where are we now, beginning of April, about any time from the beginning of May, just keeping an eye on these nighttime temperatures. I can start to take these down to the garden, into the cold frame, to begin to harden them off so that they can be planted out towards the end of May or just into the beginning of June. Great, they should be okay in those. That's what I've done for the last few years. And the other thing to mention very quickly is dust everywhere, compost dust. Normally I would have watered all of them last night where they are in the window. Despite it being cooler, we are getting quite bright sunshine on that window. So it is creating quite a lot of warmth, and of course, as the plants are growing, they're using that water, some of it's evaporating. So normally I would have watered these last night before I went to bed. They don't look poorly for not being watered, do they? But I like, before I pop things on, prick things out, what have you, I like to not water. I just find everything much easier to manage when the compost is a little bit dry, rather than sopping wet. So that's something else to bear in mind if you haven't done any of this before. The day before, don't do any watering, so that, yeah, it's all a bit easier to manage. Right, let's get all these peppers done, out of the way, out of the kitchen, then I can start in on my tomatoes and celery. Only 2.5, 3 weeks late. It's not too bad. Goodness me, those peppers took forever. Actually, they took an hour and a half. I always forget how long things take. It's crazy, isn't it? I think it's one of those things, though, where, you know, don't rush it. Don't rush it for the possibility of damaging your seedlings you've nurtured this far. Don't rush it because, you know, let's put a bit of ourselves into the process. Let's be in that moment, in that process. It's all about that reward that's going to come later, so let's put the effort in now. I would just say though that with these things, you have to kind of just think about your time a little bit. Fortunately, I've given myself this morning and afternoon to be doing all this. So like I say, I don't have to rush, I can quietly get on with it. Also to say, the peppers, they're all now back in the window. Obviously spread out now, they're on the window seat, on the floor. We're getting to that stage again, aren't we, where our lives are taken over by pots. Excuse me, the ticket, I've got a really sore throat. Anyway, yes, they've all had a watering in now. Just help those roots settle in, help them, obviously I've firmed them in, they should have good contact with the compost, but that watering will also help settle all the compost in around their roots. And as I mentioned, I didn't water them yesterday. Right, now, celery. This is green Utah. This is from my own saved seed from last year. So the plants were, the original seed was sown in 2019. What year are we in? Yeah, originally sown in 2019 in early March. They were in the garden by June, and by about August I was starting to have my first few harvests. And because I use it as a cut and come again celery, rather than one where you would take the whole head out, this is a self-blanching variety. It actually pretty much doesn't blanch, so it looks very different to that kind of stuff you normally see in the shop that's so pale and stringy and ugh. This is green. You don't harvest the whole head, you just take a few leaves or stalks from here and there. The plant stays in the ground and keeps growing and keeps growing. So it's a really useful one if you are in a small garden. I always think I've got a small garden. Other people look at it and say, you've got massive space. But it's all about maximising whatever space we've got to feed ourselves throughout the whole year. So because it's a cut and come again, like I say, from about the end of August, beginning of September, I start to harvest. It stays in through the winter. I keep harvesting all through the winter. And then, so it was 2019. And then in 2020, I'd had my last harvests. I needed to clear the bed to put my squash in. So when did I clear the bed? It was about the end of May. I left one plant in. I left my best plant in to go to seed. Throughout the course of June and July, it flowered and it set its seed. And then it was around about the middle of August, the seeds were all there. We were due a big windstorm, so I thought, oh my goodness, I'd better get out and get that seed, because it would have just disappeared because it's so tiny. I don't know if you can see. Oh, hang on a sec. I'm going to tip you down so you can see how tiny it is. Ready? Here we go. Oh, no. I'm going to tip you down. I mean, it's like, it's like dust. So, if you grow some this year and you're happy with it, think about next year in 2022, think about leaving one of your plants in to go to seed, and then you'll have seed of your own. You won't need to buy any. Yay! We're always looking at those two things in this sort of the self-sufficiency garden, aren't we? Can we grow enough food to survive on? Can we produce our own seeds so we don't have to buy? So that's my saved seed. Now, my absolute top tip with growing celery, when you start them, I was mentioning this earlier, I start mine in these paper pots, filled pretty much right to the top. Sow them really thinly, really, really thinly. Ideally, I don't want more than 3 or 4 in there. No matter how hard I try, I'll probably end up with 20. But sow them really thinly, because they are an incredible fiddle to prick out when they're big enough. even when they're ready to prick out, when their first 2 leaves are established and you want to get ready to prick out, I've never ever filmed me pricking mine out, ever, because I kind of hate it. It's so fiddly, and I swear like a navvy the whole time, and no one needs to see that. But yeah, so really, really thinly, because at that stage when you've got the 2 leaves and you're ready to prick them out and pop them on into their individual pots, their stems and their little root, it just looks like a 6-7 centimetre long piece of white cotton thread with a couple of little green leaves at the top. That's all it looks like. They're so delicate, and as you're trying, if they're quite clumped together, as you're trying to tease them apart, they will literally rip apart. You'll lose the plant. So I'm aiming for 30 to 40 plants. I will sow probably about the equivalent of 120, partly because I'm heavy-handed, but no, it's mostly because I know that when it comes to pricking them out, there will be a lot of waste. It doesn't matter how careful you are, how much time you take with it, there's always a ton of waste. And the reason I was talking about doing the paper pots is I find it makes it much, much easier at pricking out time. When that time comes, I've got my lovely little seedlings in the top, I literally cut down the side of the pot and then sort of open it out on the work surface, open it out flat. And it just means I can sort of tickle a little, just tease those roots apart, get them separated, get them potted on. I may try and show you that this year. I'll just have to get the bleep machine ready, because honestly, you know, I know some of you in the past, because you've mentioned it to me, you've tried and then you've given up because that pricking out stage is just awful. They don't look like they're growing, they don't look like they're doing anything. Celery, once it's in the garden, could not be easier. It's one of the easiest crops. It likes and needs to be wet. Well, moist. It needs to be kept moist. It's a bog plant originally, or it's related to a bog plant. Other than keeping it moist in the garden, I don't do anything with it. I don't feed it. All I do is harvest. It's great, but getting it to that point of getting it in the garden, honestly, it's not for the faint-hearted. What's interesting is every year, the point at which I do plant them out, there's probably still only 3 or 4 true leaves. They're still really tiny. They will go from home to the cold frame to harden off before being planted out, of course, like any of my indoor grown veggies. But once they're in the ground, they seem to love it, and that's when they start to really, really get going. So ridiculously thinly. And if you can be bothered with the faff of making your own paper pots, do. Because if I was doing it, say, in the pots I was just using for the pepper, to get them out, I'd have to sort of tip it upside down, tap it out, exactly as I just showed you with the pepper. The chances are, in the process of doing that, I'll wreck every single seedling. The other thing to know about the celery is quite important is, you can see I've filled my pots quite close to the surface. A gentle firm down, just make sure that compost is in there. When I come to seed them now, thinly on the surface, I'll just tap them onto the surface to make sure they're in contact with the soil, compost. They don't then need to be covered. Don't cover your celery or your celeriac seedlings. They need that light to stimulate germination. They need dampness and light and warmth. So something else I'll keep an eye on. I've got all my propagator lids to hand. At the moment, even though it's not brilliantly warm outside, it's quite bright, so I'm getting a lot of warmth in the window during the day. So I won't have the lids on during the day, but I'll almost certainly, for the celery, pop the lids on at night time, just to retain some of that warmth. When I say night time, I probably get the lids back on by 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening, before the temperature really starts to dip. Keep them warm overnight. Next day, have the lids off. If it's if we're getting that sunshine and warmth. Right, let's sew a few. I mean, they're so tiny, and I'm aiming to go really thin, so I don't know that you're going to be able to to even see them. Too heavy, Vivi. Too heavy. If I can get, I've got here 4, 8, 12, 16, 32 paper pots. If I can get one good one from each pot, yeah, I'll be happy with that. And then, you see, I've just sort of lightly sprinkled, and then, oh, it's so lovely to have dirty hands again. State my hands. Yeah, just very gently tap them down. They're in contact with the soil. This is nice and damp. It doesn't look it, does it? But it is. This compost is dampened. So on and so forth. Thin, thin, thin sowing. Last bit of sowing today, tomatoes. So I'm going to be sowing Gardener's Delight. It's officially classed as a cherry tomato, but it always comes up quite big, more like a salad tomato. I love it for that versatility of having it raw for salads. It also roasts lovely, makes great sauces. The main thing is it's usually prolific. It's a great all-rounder. It's a slightly higher acid tomato, so for any of you who are into your bottling or canning, great. For any of you who are trying to have a slightly less acidic diet, you might want to find a lower acid tomato. I love it. So that's Gardener's Delight. I'm also going to be doing Amish paste. That's my saved seed. And then I realised, I don't think I can make out, there's about 4 left in the bottom of there from the original packet last year from Real Seeds. I'm going to be doing my Rose de Berne, which is another, I should have said, sorry, the Amish paste and Rose de Berne are both big, chunky, beefy tomatoes, great for chunking up and making a sauce from. And then 2, I don't know the names of them, they've both self-seeded in my garden over the last couple of years. One is an orange cherry, prolific, and the other is a little plum. Again, it was really pretty prolific. In terms of quantities, eventually I want, as my main tomato bed, I want 32 plants. 16 in one bed, 16 in the other, 2 rows of 8. I came to that conclusion about, I think maybe about 5-6 years ago. So excuse me, I came to the sort of conclusion that that was enough plants to give me enough tomatoes for both enjoying them raw in the moment over the summer, and then for storing to last right through the whole year. Folk often ask me, how many should I plant of X, Y and Z? It's impossible for me to say because I don't know what you like to eat. I don't know how often you eat these things. I don't know how many members of your family there are. But over the years, I think maybe I started with 10 plants in the first year. It wasn't enough. And I think the next year I went up to having 20 plants. Still wasn't enough. And that's how eventually I came to having 32 plants. However, if I've got spares, I'll dot them around the garden if none of my friends want them. So quite often I'll end up with more like maybe another 4, 5, 6 on top of it. So maybe more like sort of 35, 36 plants, 37, 38. So in order to get that number of plants, today I'm going to be sowing 72 seeds. I've got 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, I've got 18 pots in each tray. Each pot will get 2 seeds in, so I'll hopefully get 36 plants in each tray. which means one tray is what I need for the garden, the other tray will be spare, and also obviously poor germination, taking it, I'm not bigging myself up when I say this, but I found over the years I don't tend to have germination issues with my own saved seed. Obviously when I save seed I'm selecting from the best plants, the strongest, healthiest plants, the plants that have been, the most productive over the season. So it makes sense that I'm picking the best. And when I do save for seed, I always let that fruit or whatever it is that the seed is contained in, I let it get really, 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 really ripe to the point of dropping off and rotting on the ground, because that means those seeds are really, really mature. They've been well nourished on the mother plant. It's what would happen in nature. They get to that absolute overripe stage, fall off the plant, fall on the soil, germinate, Bob's your uncle. So yes, 2 per pot. I'm not going to show you the whole thing because I've been on one for ages today, and like I said, I've got this bit of a sore throat going on. 2 per pot, and then the lightest sprinkling to cover them, maybe like half a centimetre of compost to cover them. Depends how fine your compost is. I think these days we all have problems with compost being a bit thick and gnarly and lumpy and what have you. So there we go. Right, I need to concentrate, otherwise I'm going to end up with 79 tomatoes in each little pot. It feels so good to get some more seeds on the go. It has felt like it's been really, really late, but it's not that late actually, 2 or 3 weeks here or there. So yes, great to get those on. Great to get the peppers potted on, because as I was saying right at the beginning, where they're quite close in their pots, they're going to start fighting for light. And imagine, if you think of a really packed forest, how tall and straight those trees go as they're looking for light. Well, my peppers were a little pepper forest, desperately searching for light. So I'm really glad to get those done today. And the thing that I always feel at this time of year, it never, ever stops being amazing and exciting for me, is handling these tiny, tiny seeds. I mean, tomato seeds are pretty tiny, but the celery seeds, they're barely a point of a pin. What amazes me is that within those tiny, tiny seeds is the possibility for these, in the case of the tomatoes, these plants which could be 6, 7, 8 feet tall, giving me pounds and pounds and pounds of fruit from a tiny, tiny seed. It blows my mind. I think it's just, I love to be amazed by it every year. Let's not ever take that sort of thing for granted. Let's be amazed at the potential of every single little seed. Yay! Oh, never mind waxing lyrical. I've got to start cleaning up the kitchen. There's compost on the floor. There's twigs on the counter that I've pulled out of the compost. But yeah, great. Now, I'm not sure where you'll see me next. Hopefully in the garden. Either way, yeah. Getting back on it all. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Did you get your fingers dirty too? I hope so. I do hope so. If you didn't today, then I hope you can get your fingers dirty very, very soon. So, I'll see you soon. Until then, please look after yourselves. Look after your gorgeous little seeds. See you all whenever. Bye for now.